So in our last class we talked about clipping masks, and there is a different kind of mask that we can work with. It's called a opacity mask. Opacity mask, we use an alpha channel, and an alpha channel is a fancy word for being able to add transparency. So the clipping mask, you do not have the option to add a transparency to it. With the transparency mask, you can do all kinds of things with this. So typically it's done with a gradient or something like that. You can use different shades of gray to make your alpha channel. Alpha channel is the fancy term for how you're going to apply that transparency. So in Photoshop you have alpha channels. In Illustrator we don't talk about them as alpha channels quite as much, but that's basically what they are. So let's take a look and see where we kind of left off. So a lot of you probably have your text without the outline around it. So to make that outline, let's click on it. Okay, we're going to do the same thing we did in the last class. We're going to copy, and I'm going to hit Control F to paste a copy exactly on top of that. Let's take a look at how that appears in our palette here. I'll go and make this palette a little bit bigger. Oh, it is large already. Okay, so here we have two identical copies. I can turn one on and off. I'm going to select the whole thing by clicking on the dot here. Okay, I'm going to come up here under Object, Clipping Mask, and I'm going to release that. So now you'll see that in here we have the path for our name, and then we have this extra image here. We do not need that, so I'm going to click on that and hit Delete. So now this is still here, it just doesn't have a stroke or a fill. So let's give that a fill, or a stroke. Give it a black stroke. And we can copy this. Control C. And we can paste it again. Control F. So now let's look at that in our window here. We have two copies of the same thing. Alright, let's grab this. We talked about different ways of reordering objects. You can hit Control Shift open bracket to move something down once it's selected. And now you'll see that it's all the way on the bottom. You can also reorder objects in your layer menu by clicking and dragging them this way. So now we have that all the way on the bottom. We had talked a little bit about some of the fun you can have with strokes. Let's change the color of the stroke by clicking on the Stroke Color Editor. And I'm going to give it a color. For right now, let's just go with red. And why are we getting gray? Because the reason we're getting gray is because we are in grayscale color mode. So let's go here and change this. We'll get into colors in a little bit here, but there are a lot of different ways you can do your colors. Let's do it now. You have grayscale, RGB, HSB, which is hue, saturation, and brightness, CMYK. RGB is more useful for web or multimedia applications, whereas CMYK is much better for print applications. So if you were going to print a book or print something on a laser printer and you wanted the exact color or close to the exact color, because we should all know that the colors on the monitor are not necessarily the colors that come out on our printer. So CMYK will probably give you a closer approximation. There are things called color gamut, which we can talk about in a little bit. Color gamut in RGB is much wider. You can get many more possible colors. CMYK, the color gamut is much more limited, and that's due to what you're able to get through the printing process. Okay, so let's go back to our red stroke, which you can't see right now because it's underneath. We can change the point size on this and go up to 3 points. Okay, you can start to see it a little bit now, but there's a function in our stroke editor here where you can set different alignments. Okay, so here it is aligned to the center of the stroke, and we can show you that by going and turning off everything. So now you'll see the center of the green line means that it's on the center. Okay, This means that it is inside the path, and this means that it is outside the path. So let's take a look and see what that actually does for us. So here we have changed the stroke to expand outside of the path. Alright, you can come here. That's on the inside, you're not going to see it. Outside, much more effective way of using your stroke. Okay, so let's zoom back out, Control 0. And you know, we've got this nice graphic here, but it looks kind of dead on that white background. So let's add an opacity mask and have a little bit of fun with that. So the same way we're placing bitmap objects, we're going to go to File, Place. I'm going to grab a metal texture, and I'm going to place it. And then to resize this, I'm going to hit Control minus. Now I can scale this up. You'll notice I'm not being very careful with whether I'm constraining or not. Remember that if you wanted to resize something, you can hit Shift to constrain it to the same proportion. But if you're not too concerned about that, you can always just scale variably, do things this way. So now we have this. So obviously it's covering our text. Control Shift, open bracket, or we can relayer, or we can come up under Object, Arrange, Send to Back. Another way to do that would be to right-click on it. You have to have the object selected, right-click on it. You get the Arrange menu, same thing there. So a lot of different ways to reorder an object. So now let's create a box. And we're going to go right over top of what we need. Okay. And we do not need a red stroke on it, so we're going to turn that off by clicking on the not sign. We're going to change our fill color to a gradient. So we're getting the fill color on top. Come over here to stroke, or our gradient menu, and to do an alpha channel does not have color in it. It is just black and white. So let's do this. We'll click on this, and what is black in an alpha channel becomes invisible. What is white will appear. So we can come back over to our gradient tool as opposed to the gradient palette and change the direction of our gradient. I want the gradient to be black on the top, I think. Let's see how that works for us. Alright, so now we have the gradient is over top of our object. You'll remember that with the clipping mask we also had to have things lined up so that everything was over top of each other. I can zoom in and fine-tune this gradient a little bit because we don't want to have any edges showing. Alright, let's zoom back over here. Everything looks good. Control 0 to go back to the full view. Now I'm going to draw a culling box just over the corner of both of these. I don't have to draw it over the whole object. So now I have both of them selected. We have a window called a transparency window. You can find this under Window. Scroll down to Transparency if you need to. There it is. You can also hit Control Shift F10. So let's go back, make sure that's selected. Now I can come here and say Make Mask. So you'll notice this is a very different mask than what we had. You'll notice that it is white at the top where everything was black. If I want to invert that mask, I can click here and invert it, and now it's looking much more interesting. So now we kind of got a nice little graphic going here. We've got some textures. I use the same texture in my text as I'm using in my background. If you want to mix and match textures, there is not a problem with that. Since we are in computer, if you wanted to change the width on this and not make it quite so tight, you can change that. And then, you know, it's still kind of bugging me that this text here is over top. Oh, let me get back to this. So here, when I am in this editor mode, I cannot edit anything but the mask. So if I try to click on my text, you'll notice that it is locked. I cannot get to it. I need to come back here and click on the image area to affect change now to this. You can get really messed up on that and really get frustrated. So keep that in mind that to edit your mask, you can click on the mask portion and change portions like this. So here I'm editing the mask. I can still do this, okay? But I cannot click on any other artwork other than the mask when I'm in this mode. I can come back here to the image side, and now I can click on this, but I cannot edit the opacity of my alpha channel. Okay, so let's lock this stuff down. We have not talked about locking yet. We can go to our layer palette, and you can lock things by locking within here. You don't have to lock just the whole layer. You can lock individual parts. What we want to do is just lock the background though. So I'm going to click on background here. I'm going to lock, and I'm going to lock this, and now I'm going to come here and put a box around this. I do not need my drop shadow, so let's unselect that. I'm going to hold down the Shift key. Now I have just my text. I can come over here to my rotate tool, and I can click and rock this baby down just a wee bit. There we go. Now it looks like it's resting on that horizon line that we've set up. So that is just a little bit on alpha channels and an opacity mask as opposed to a clipping mask. I hope you enjoy this. Have fun with it.